Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning. Good morning,
I
Pascal.
I'm so happy to have you here today. And for everyone out there who's listening, I'm chatting with Rachel Zitin today. She is, like me, a fellow U.S. expat living in Italy, and we're speaking via Zoom. You're in Rome right now. And, you and I have a nice sort of how we met story. And a lot of the premise of the new season of the podcast is actually, it's based on a lot of these random encounters that I have with people that have this sort of serendipitous and magical nature to them. And, you and I met for the first time probably a few years back and whatever. And then we met at an event, at a La Clit event at 22 here in Florence, and we connected. And then we ran into each other again earlier this month at an event at Querceto di Castellina, a beautiful vineyard dinner. And you shouted out to me, and I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I remember you. And we actually, we started talking again. And I said, Rachel, you have to come on the podcast and talk about all the amazing things you do and are doing.
Hmm.
As I said, I think that the key to this season of the podcast is that I've realized how important and necessary these encounters are in our lives, especially now, and when you really stop and talk to somebody and listen to them, and you find you have all these amazing connections, even just beyond the Italy expat thing. It's kind of like a shame not to then have the person on the podcast. Let's continue the conversation. And I learned so much from these meetings that I have these random encounters, and I want to share them with everyone who's out there listening to us. So I thought we could get started by you're just telling us a little bbit about what you do and who you are.
Awesome. Just a simple task, right?
Right.
I thank you for that beautiful introduction. I live, like you said, I am also an American expat. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, and I actually moved to Rome right after I finished college, so 16 years ago. And I came here visiting friends. It was sort of just one of those crazy continuing to say yes is what I always say. And if I'm really honest, I've sort of blinked and it's been 16 years. So one thing I like to say is I've lived my whole adult life in Rome. And then what I do. So I started off in tourism. I worked in every single sector, place, aspect of tourism pretty much that's possible in this city. I've worked as a tour guide. I've worked in PR. I've worked in offices. I've gone to travel conferences. And about 8 years ago, I finally, after like 2 years of sort of hemming and hawing, basically, I did my yoga teacher training and I came back to Rome and I started to teach yoga. Really, honestly, I did it not necessarily to teach yoga. And over a couple of years, that translated into me wanting to lead retreats, which is my kind of full-time thing now. And over the past 5 years, honestly, I've built this retreat business. I have, again, kind of worn a lot of different hats in the retreat
Yeah.
world. But then today, what I would say is I lead slow living retreats, mostly for women. I do co-gendered retreats. If I'm collaborating with people, I have done them. But for me personally, women's retreats, teaching women, being with women, how to reconnect to their bodies. And then from reconnecting to the body, which I do through yoga, through somatic dance, through movement, through meditation, through healthy eating, healthy being a word actually I might not even want to use here, through nourishing eating, and through pleasure and through joy. And honestly, what you said before really resonated because the thing, I think the beautiful thing about this work, the work that I'm doing, and I think the work you're doing too, is that we sort of evolve with the times. And so what I'm seeing, finding, feeling the most right now is I create spaces for people, for women to connect with other women. And in those connections, I give or encourage permission to be themselves, to explore, to leave behind sort of the rules and the standards and the things that society tells us to do. And yeah, I think my retreats have really, they've evolved so much over the past 5 years. But right now, I would say it's really about just like fun, play, pleasure, rest, and connection.
Which is like what we all like. I like sign me up, like
Yes.
this is what we all need right now. And I think we should start by talking about your retreats because I'd like to know how sort of like a typical one plays out. But I'd also like to know, you said that in the last 5 years, things have really evolved. And I think it really is a question of keeping up with the times, and wellness. So much attention is paid to that. And I'd like to hear how you've evolved with that and how you see this wonderful world of wellness retreats in Italy. But I mean, they're all over the world, of course. But so what does your typical retreat look like? And then how do you view this sort of increasingly evolving landscape of the wellness world?
Awesome question. So I'll start with I like to differentiate between wellness and hashtag wellness, right? So hashtag wellness is one of the largest industries in it's like the growth and I think, and I never want to be the person who's like, and I think that most of it's stupid because ultimately, like, we can find stupidity in anything and we can find beauty in anything. But I will say that I find that there is a subtle but huge difference between hashtag wellness and being well. And for me, one of the big aha moments that I had because so I'll start with my retreats began with, and I always like to say this, and I say this with a lot of love for all of the wonderful humans in the world who still lead retreats like this, which is my retreat started out very like love and light. Like we're doing yoga, we're being well, we're detoxing, we're not drinking alcohol, we're eating very healthy food. And again, healthy, nourishing food. And it was actually, I'll tell a story. So one of my dear friends who I do retreats with, she'd been doing retreats for much longer than me. And the first retreat we led together in the morning, I'm about to teach an hour and a half of yoga. And we wake up and I go to put some coffee on. It's before the guests have woken up. And she goes, oh no, I don't do coffee on my retreats. I want them to kind of try to detox. And I was like, okay, yeah, they can do whatever they want. I need coffee before I teach yoga. So no worries. And she's like, well, they'll smell it. And it was like now she laughs about it too. But I was like, no. Like, I don't want to create an experience where I'm encouraging deprivation. And again, I see, understand, and acknowledge the space and time for that kind of a program. It's just not my program. And so then over time, really pretty quickly into leading retreats, I think the thing is that when you start any job for the first time, which for me was kind of entrepreneurship in the retreat world, it takes a little time to remember that your magic is the magic that you should be bringing to these experiences. And so in the beginning, it was like, oh, well, maybe, no alcohol. And then I was like, these people are coming to Italy. I want them to drink wine. I want them to eat pasta. I want them to experience that for an Italian. And I always joke that in a funny way, obviously, wellness as sort of the industry has come here as well, which is something I love. I can't even tell you how delightful it is that like you can find avocados in this country now, baseline. Or I've lived here 16 years. There wasn't like yoga studios when I moved here. Like that didn't exist. And so acknowledging how grateful I am for it. And then also acknowledging that for a typical Italian, wellness is being a 75-year-old woman at the beach in a bikini, eating pasta, drinking a glass of wine, and smoking a cigarette. And while I understand that those are, habits that might be considered, not for longevity, to use another buzzword, that woman is having the best time. And
Yeah.
isn't that kind of what we want and deserve? And isn't that what I've learned from living in Italy? So I think to sort of get back to your question, my retreats now, and I teach yoga. I love teaching yoga. So on my retreats, I have yoga classes every morning. Everything's optional, but I have yoga classes every morning. I create journal prompts that take the women through an experience for the week, because for me, journaling is my most precious and important habit. And it's something I want to give to people. I talk about my various health and wellness practices while also acknowledging that the funny thing about working in wellness is you filter through everything. And then I'm really passionate about the idea of both, like, what it's like, you really can do whatever you want. So be a fabulous woman who has white hair who wants to dye her hair. Be a woman who wants to get Botox or like do whatever you want, but don't just do the things because they're what the industry is selling you. And I think Italians, and I'm sure you do this too, I over romanticize the Italians. And sometimes people are like, but that's not how your average Italian is. I'm like, no, no, no. But like the vision of the Italians is they give themselves, especially Italian women, more permission to be. And I think that's something that we need a lot more of, is being instead of doing. So yeah, that's the evolution.
I love what you said. And there are a couple of things that I want to comment on specifically. One is that I'm so grateful that you're not judgy,
No.
because I do think that living in Italy has probably shaped that part of you. I think that now, as I look at my, the way I live my life, the way I've chosen to live my life, and by living in Italy and all that jazz. But more than anything, it's like I think we're inundated with all these messages of what we should be doing and what, and there's a fad every 2 seconds and it's impossible to keep up and you feel guilty if you're not doing this or that, and that's just not good for us. It's not good for us. And so I love the fact that you have this approach that is so open and welcoming and forgiving. I
Yeah.
I I think that a lot of times, we didn't grow up. You're younger than I am, but I feel like this is probably
Yeah.
similar for you. But like, I didn't grow up with a notion of like self care or forgiving myself or any of this stuff. And so already for me, wellness is like this. I've kind of, I have my own little personal cocktail of what that looks like. But I think you touched on something so important in the Italian culture, which is, Italians are hedonists, the whole pleasure principle, but they live a really long time. And, it's not just the Mediterranean diet. Experts are really studying this. A lot of it is the community, the human connection, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
that is why these retreats that you're doing are so fundamental. You talk about journaling, really, really looking deep inside of ourselves and reflecting upon community, our growth, our journeys, whatever form they might take. So I love that. And I think that going on a retreat with you would be an amazing experience because it feels like
Mm.
you let people really be. And you have, I'm gonna quote you because you have this sort of this mantra, which is that and you mentioned it earlier in the podcast. You said you want to help people become who they already are. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit more, how you do that?
Yeah. What an awesome, it's so fun hearing your own words and being like, yeah, I do say that. And it's true. I deeply believe, like you said, that we are inundated right now. And in that I mean, and like just this whole idea of social media, which did not exist when I was growing up, like it did not exist when you were growing up. And the whole idea, like you said, so even something like self care becomes this checklist.
Hmm.
I led women's circles for a couple years here in Rome. I'm on pause with it right now, but I will get back into it at some point. And one of my favorite circles I ever led, and now it's a workshop that I sort of bring into my retreats too, is in the context of self care. I have us go around and say one hashtag self care thing that we don't like. And it every single time it yields, I mean, 10 women sitting around like, wait a second, mine, I'll give mine. I don't really like taking baths. I'm 5'9". I don't fit in many bathtubs. I get in, I get like, I understand the point of it. So I can intellectually be like, if I'm, the magnesium, like, I get it. But it feels like a chore to me. And I've never once been like, that's not true. I've been excited about a bath once or twice in my life, but it's not something I love. So why am I going to tell myself I should do that? And I think that, women go around and they're like, I don't like journaling. Or people often, kind of a flip side to that is they'll say to me, you're so good because you journal every day. I'm like, no, no, I've been doing this since I was 13. It's like telling, it's my it's my antidepressant, it's my medicine, it's something I love. It's a habit that I enjoy. And so it became a daily habit. And I think that the permission to be who you already are is you don't have to be. And I think this is a really, it's a slippery slope in the wellness industry. I really don't want to encourage people to be me. I do not want to be guruified. I don't like, I will have women on retreat who say, wow, you're so, living in Italy. That's amazing. And I'm like, it's not for everyone. It's a choice I made, honestly, before I was old enough to make the choice. And I don't want to encourage people to be me or to be a wellness influencer that they follow or to be anyone but who they are. Right. And so in encouraging people to be who they are, it's like giving people permission to say, yes, this is me. I've done, and I think personal development is just throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. So it's like, I'm trying my best to get back to the me that I was when I was about 5. And she is who all of us deserve to get back to. And so it's also, yeah, I think that encouraging women to be who they are is something I also, again, I see it more because Italians are so community oriented as opposed to America, which is so individualist oriented.
Yeah.
In community, it's actually easier to be you than in an individualist society, kind of counterintuitively, because in individualism, you're in your own little tiny vacuum. In community, you're like, oh, I'm watching myself and that's being who you already are in retreat is I'm connecting with someone who's different than me. I'm acknowledging, respecting, admiring who they are. And then they're giving me that in return. And so we both know that who we are is, perfect for lack of a better term. Yeah.
I think that's, I mean, I've there are so many things I want to talk about with what you just said. And I think I'd like to start with the last thing you said, which is the community, just taking it back to that in a second, and I think that we hear a lot today about, the crisis of, loneliness, this epidemic of loneliness and how, people are feeling so isolated. There's a lot of polarization and the obvious cure, and this is like, as I said, like, is meeting people. Like when you and I saw each other at that event, you shouted out to me, you know
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, it's wonderful Rachel, like joyous Rachel. And having those opportunities, it was a community dinner, and being able to share a few hours with somebody, whether that be on a retreat or, on a social occasion, what have you, it's just like, it makes you feel good again. It makes you feel, and you reflect on yourself. Like, you have a conversation with somebody and you say, wait, like, oh, this person is also doing these things. And, we're experiencing similar things, or even if we're experiencing different things, it is always an enrichment. And so I see that as being such critical work that you're doing. And I want to touch on, once again, you spoke about the slippery slope in the wellness world. And I'm really glad because you're kind of demystifying it for me in a lot of ways. And you're also, how can I say this, making it feel less threatening to me. Like I have been on one wellness retreat, with my friend Sandrine, who was there actually that night as well. And you and she have similar, you have some parallels in the work that you do. And she's kind of been, encouraging me to take on this, this different approach to my life, which is hard, because of the way we are conditioned as women, um,
Hmm.
the way I was brought up, what I
Hmm.
thought my priorities were up until now, you know? And so I think that, again, you know, having this understanding of, okay, I am who I am. I want to get back that inner, you know, I want to find that joy again. But this non threatening um, approach that you have, because I think a lot of people do feel intimidated by all of the, or even just like confused by a
Yeah.
lot of the noise out there surrounding wellness.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, okay, so I have so many comments on that. I think so. The first thing that came to mind is every single person that we meet is a reflection of ourselves, right? Which is like Buddhist yoga. It's like one of those philosophies of everyone standing in front of you gets to be a mirror. And when you start to live in a space, so it kind of that brings me into like embodiment, which
Yeah,
is the word, it's like, again, a buzzword. And I think that's the interesting thing about the internet is your algorithm and feed will feed you whatever you are, and suddenly we're hearing this word embodiment. I mean, as an aside, the amount of stupid here I am like looking at my phone, like, oh yeah, you're listening to me. I get these like, ads on Instagram that are like embodiment for your sex life, embodiment for your professional life, embodiment for your, do this 28-day challenge where and it's like, I look at them and sometimes I'm like, this is great. Some people need a starting point. And the actual truth is, embodiment is just being able to be inside your body, to go from the neck down, to connect to what you need, what you want, what you desire. And I think that those are, like you were saying before, those are words and concepts that are so, especially in like Western culture, in American culture, where it's like, what if we allowed ourselves to just, and again, I encourage people on my retreats. If you don't want to come to yoga, don't do yoga. Don't. Like, if you want to come to yoga and lay on the floor in Shavasana the whole time, do that. If you're a person, I know so many people, and it's something that I used to be like, well, that's silly. And now I'm like, it's just their experience. People who won't go to public yoga classes because they're scared people are looking at them, which the judgment in me is like, no one's looking at you. Everyone's too worried thinking about themselves.
right.
But the compassionate leader in me is like, yeah, that's a real worry. And if you are with the right people, you'll realize that worry is unfounded, which then brings us back to connection and also back to the demystification of like, again, back to square one, wellness is being well, and being well is being in touch with yourself. And I think I loved what you said when you said how I approached you, because that's like, I was about to say it's the most on brand thing for me, that I'm just like, I'm a Labrador, right? Like I see people and I'm just like, oh! And it's like, it's something I didn't do for a long time because it felt weird. And now I'm kind of at the point where, and I think it's so funny. I'm thinking of the Velveteen Rabbit quote, which is so cute and so adorable, where it's like, you just become. And once you become who you really are, you're like a little worn down, and there's some, your eyes or whatever, all that stuff, your fur is a little worn. But it's like you become comfortable enough in yourself that or I have become, let me say that, let me rephrase. I have become comfortable enough in myself that I recognize that everyone around me is a miracle. And I also, and God, this is the hardest one, recognize that I'm not for everyone, just like no one is for everyone. And so in the space of creating a retreat, it's really recognizing like, I want people who want to be in deeper connection with themselves and with others. I want people who might be a little nervous about hearing the word pleasure, but I always say, like, I'm a very approachable pleasure coach. Like, I'm not, and I think it's also beautiful that there's women who are more controversial or more subversive or more like va
Hmm.
va voom in what they're teaching. But for me, I'm like, we're all just people having people experiences. And yeah, I guess the baseline is back to what you were saying, which is the intimidation aspect of the wellness industry is it's how a lot of people make a lot of money. And once we take that away, like once we kind of start to peel away, like who's profiting from this, we recognize like all of us kind of want to be that part, like all of us want to connect. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, I think we were talking about it before we got on the podcast, before we started recording, sort of just how everything has shifted and everything feels so inauthentic. And, you know, I think also just peeling away what you were saying, like having to like get through all the fog, which is like the greed, the money, the industry, to get to what really matters, which is the people. And so, or in this case, um, going on a retreat with you sounds like just such an important way to reconnect with ourselves, and or even to find something that we didn't know we had or that we've lost. And I think, you know, a good thing to say about the moment we're living in, if we can do that, but we need to,
We have
is that
to.
we have to, but is that there is this, it feels like there are endless possibilities, and those don't have to be scary. In other words, you talk about things that are so important to me, Rachel. This is why we connected. This is why the universe wanted us to meet. But it's all this, what it comes down to is we need to be evolving. I
Mm-hmm.
love what you said. Like I think, giving ourselves permission to be ourselves. This is something that I have a really hard time with, Rachel. Like I would be a
Mm-hmm.
great person for you to take on a retreat because, you know, it's hard as the product of whatever I'm the product of. It's taken me a long time to give myself permission to do certain things. And now I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I don't really care. Like, in other words, I care deeply. Okay. Like I'm deeply empathetic, I'm
Yeah.
sensitive, I love to help people. But like fundamentally, I'm not caring about all the bullshit anymore. All right. I need to do my stuff. I need to, right? And that's maybe it's comes with age, wisdom. Maybe it is even, and I'd like your thoughts on this. I think maybe it also is a consequence of just the craziness of the world. I find myself having to not only connect more deeply with others now, but with myself. I need to feel more grounded. I need to have my things, like you, whether that be my writing or, taking a walk or, getting together with somebody I love or talking to them on the phone, doing something good for myself, whatever that may be. I think I do a lot of good things for myself, but this notion of we are ever evolving, we need to
Mm-hmm.
be respectful and, understanding of other people's fears, but also of their evolution, right? And to not be so damn judgy all the time, right?
That, so much that. And I think it's, God, you just touched on so many things. I was like about to take notes and I'm like, yes. So let's start with being non judgmental because I think that's the easiest, which is we all have these damn phones that are constantly feeding us information that contradicts itself, that gives us this space. And one of my favorite things to say is that there are no rules. They're all made up, all of them, everything from like small things, like, I mean, base rules, don't kill, don't steal, but like, even like money is made up, buildings are made up. I live in a city that is filled with things that are 2,000 years old that had people that were making up their own story and myth and like everything, which is to say, once you accept that, there's also so much work to be done inside of that. And so it's like that constant both and that constant dichotomy of there are no rules and yet we can feel. And I think that's so, it's like, it's bigger than us. And it's part of this intuition of like, we know when something's right for us or wrong for us. We know when people are right for us or wrong for us. Our bodies, you know, my favorite recent meme is the idea of like, God, can't they invent a body that doesn't keep the score? But unfortunately, our bodies keep the score. So
They do.
it's our responsibility to ourselves and to the people around us to take care of the parts of ourselves that aren't in alignment, for lack of a better term. That feels really broad, but it's like what you said, which, I mean, for me, as someone who does yoga almost every single day, if I don't do yoga for 2 days, and that might be 15 minutes of stretching, it might be an hour and a half of going to a studio, my brain is off. And I am in tune enough with that now to recognize and feel that and be like, oh, why do I feel like a monster today? This. And then I think when we're in touch with ourselves like that, and this actually just occurred to me, but it's like, then we have what you said, we have the empathy to extend that to others. One of my, like, as a sort of aside, and as women, we're cyclical, right? So we have these 28 to 32 day cycles. And whether you are like menopausal post, like all in all, our bodies still are very cyclical, unlike men who have a completely different hormone cycle that's 24 to 28 hours. And so when I recognize, like, oh my goodness, we're all just going through these, like, when I recognize my own cycles and I'm like, oh God, I feel like an absolute asshole today. And instead of expressing that, I'm going to find ways to tend to myself. I'm going to
Hmm.
be, and it's something that unfortunately, American society gives a lot less allowance to. And fortunately, Italian society is, I mean, seasonal, cyclical. Like, I always joke that Italians basically, like, throughout the year, you're just constantly asking, well, what are you doing for Easter? Well, what are you doing for August? Well, what are you doing for Christmas? Well, what are you doing for Easter? Well, what are you, it's like these big cycles, little cycles. And once we're more in touch with ourselves, that's kind of what I'm trying to say, we then are able to extend that empathy to others. And then one more thing I wanted to address is that
Yeah.
idea of, like, I mean, basically not caring anymore, right? Just kind of getting to the point of like, you know what? This is who I am. And I think that is the hardest work we all have to do in this life. I don't think any of us ever completely do it because also we're social creatures and we're made to receive feedback from other people. But it made me think of a funny story on one of the journal prompts that I give on every single retreat I lead. So, spoiler alert, if you're coming on a retreat, you're going to have this someday. One of my journal prompts is write down, using all five of your senses, everything, an exhaustive list of what brings you pleasure, right? So go. And we talk about it afterwards. And sometimes I have different sort of retreat formats and different things I do, but sometimes it's in a group and sometimes it's just a conversation. But a few years ago, I had a woman and, we're all talking, maybe four of us were talking about it. And she goes, yeah, like one thing I wanted to write sex, but then I thought like, oh, what if, my future grandchildren read this? And I'm like, yeah, I think it's really okay if your future grandchildren know that you like sex. Like, that's
Yeah.
not a, that's a human thing. We all like sex. I mean, small pockets,
Most.
but
Yeah.
most of us really
Most
like
do.
sex.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, like, if it was an especially controversial thing, but even then, like, what if we destigmatize this
Yeah.
entire idea of like, yeah, not like, so her caring about that was able, and I poked a little fun at her and she laughed and I laughed and we all laughed. And it's like, how funny to think, like, once we get past not caring, we recognize that, like, most of us are having the same experience. Some people are bold enough to say it. And then they create, I mean, I know for certain that that particular woman would write sex first and foremost now, and that's a couple years later. So it's like you give that, it's back to permission giving, right?
Exactly. Exactly. But I love that story because it speaks to the way that we constantly censor ourselves. A lot of the judgment that I was talking about probably just comes from us as well. And then there's a lot of neuroscience now that talks about like the messages that we send ourselves. And like how you can reverse that by telling yourself a different, giving yourself a different narrative, telling yourself different things. But I think something that you said, just pleasure, like maybe, and maybe the two of us, and I knew this was going to get juicy. I told you it was going to get juicy, but I wonder how much of that has also been developed or nurtured or stimulated by the fact that we live in a country of pleasure seekers. You like
Yes,
that one? Talk to me.
I love
Talk
that.
to me.
Okay. So first, I just want to really quickly say, yes, exactly. Our brains, one of the things I love to say, one of my favorites is our brain is the most important organ in our body, according to our brain. Our brain decided that. So leaving that there and just to say neuroplasticity. So this idea that what we tell ourselves, our brain will believe anything we tell it. And it is up to us to like take the reins there a little. And the rest of us gets to do that.
Yep.
And then God, the Italians as pleasure seekers and hedonists is just, it's my favorite because it is something that my whole adult life, 16 years of living here, and I still catch myself, oh goodness, an embarrassing amount of time, like weekly, being like, oh God, they're just so over the top. Still, like an us versus them, like me and my like good American, like not that I was raised religious at all, but like, that Protestant work ethic, like Puritan, like, oh, the Italians are just, they don't even care about getting enough sleep at night and sleep is really important. And then I'm like, Rachel, you're a joke. Like like here I am. And I really do go back and forth with that. And the fact of the matter is like, I, mi sono italianizzata. I have Italianized myself in every single way. And I think by living here and by being around people who are baseline quite hedonistic and baseline live really good lives and baseline teach me every single day that it is okay to walk out of your house in the morning with one plan and come back 8 hours later having had a like Alice in Wonderland style completely different day. And I think that it's back to there are no rules too, right? Like the Italians, it's like when one of the very Roman, I guess it's all in Italy, but very Roman is c'è sempre domani. There's always tomorrow.
Yep.
So anything you could do today, you could do tomorrow. Time is made up also. And living in Italy has certainly given me this very big sense of, oh my God, we're kind of just here to have fun and experience pleasure. And that's not it. I have, there's so many other levels and layers, but if that's my baseline, sort of how I want to live my life, then that's my baseline of what I want to teach other women. And all of the other stuff, which I find so important too, as in do the deep self work, do the shadow work, do it. And remember that like at the end of the day, we're here to have fun. And the Italians, they're they're effing great at that. They really
Yeah.
are.
And I think, I want to ask you other ways. You said that you're Italianized now, and I want to get to that in a second, but I just want to comment on what you said. And I think that it's contagious, right? Like that kind of approach to life is quite contagious. And, I'm the same way. Like I still struggle with this a little because I'm very American in the way I work and, my expectations of, whatever. But I've become so much more elastic. I've become so much more creative. And also just giving space to like unforeseen events, random encounters, something that otherwise maybe I would have been, who knows what I would have been like had I stayed in America. I've been living here so long now, I don't even know who I am. But what are those other ways that you see yourself? Like, what has been um, so revelatory for you since you have been living in Italy? What is like the thing that you most love about the Italian way of life, or the way you have become? Use the great word, the way you have become Italianized or Italianized yourself.
Oh goodness. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is summer, right? I, and this is it's actually a funny personal sort of journey story, which is I worked in tourism for
Mm.
the first 10 years. I mean, I still work in tourism some, but the first 10 years I lived here, I really worked in tourism full time. And in tourism, I was taking mostly American tourists around. And so in the summer, I would take 4 or 5 days off in August. But the tourism cycle is tourism is Easter to October, November. It's a little different these days, but that's what it was. It was Easter to October. And so in the winter, I would go on adventures and I would go traveling and I would do stuff. But in the summer, I was pretty like American, pretty nose to the grindstone, pretty going for it. I would take a few days off in August because that's what the Italians do. And I would get invited to all of these things. And I had to say no because I was working for agencies and I was kind of living my life like an American living in Italy. And this is my 20s, really. And I remember sort of thinking, when people would invite me, like, oh yeah, like, we're going to Ponza next weekend. We're going to Argentina. Like, we're doing these things. And it would be like, well, I have work, I have work, I have work. And there was that judgment voice in me that was like, don't they have work? And then my funny story, like what? Come on. Like we're all worker bees. In 2020, so pandemic times, obviously I did not have work anymore. And I was able to, for the first time, just say yes to all the experiences, to all the things, no limits, no, it was just like, yes, 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 yes. And so it's been, 5 years of the 16 years that I've lived here. And to be fair, for a couple years before the pandemic, it had started, but the pandemic was what gave me the full permission to be like, I want to live my summer the way I live my summer. August, like now, so an Italianized thing is now when my American friends say to me, like, oh yeah, like this week in August is a really busy work week. My brain is like, what? No, no, but it's August. Why would you can't have that much work then. That's what August is. We don't work in August. Um, and I think that that's, what a beautiful habit. It's hot. It's like the summer, the longer days are starting to come to a close. Like no one wants to do that much stuff in August. And that's back to sort of living seasonally and cyclically. So that's one way. Goodness. I mean, the way I drive, very Italian. I
Oh,
always
honey,
say,
you got it.
yeah,
It's survival of the fittest. You got to
ex-
do what you got to do.
exactly. I always say the Italians don't follow the rules, but they pay attention. Americans pay attention, or follow the rules, but they don't pay attention.
That's a good
So,
way of putting it.
right. And
Yeah.
neither is right or wrong, but I certainly am more Italian. Um, when I'm back in the States and restaurants close at 8:30, my brain is like, huh? But also I can recognize, like, I can get back into the other habits. It's just not my baseline. Um, and then I think the biggest thing is just letting go of goal orientation as this constant linear striving. I think in Italy, there's a lot deeper sense of it's not being an individualist. So no one's sitting there like, pick me, I stand out, I achieve, I go, I do, I go, I do. It's like I hang out, I'm with my friends. I don't mind if I'm recognized. I mean, individuals all change, but it's just less linear, goal oriented, like bup, bada bup, and more I'm in flow. There's like things we can look at time in like decades instead of minutes, months, like less urgency, um, less shame. Like I think it's so interesting that, you know, in America, it's shameful to say I actually will admit I'm not a nap person, but as an example, I need a midday nap in America is shameful. And in Italy is like lauded, like great, take that, so really recognizing like when we take away the cultural shame of our own desires, we're able to be like to live more like an Italian.